didn't expect you to be fans of the amazing Spider-Man 3 Invasion of the Spider Slayers, but I guess someone at Beanox is, because it's kind of the same thing, but instead of being a piece of garbage, it's painfully mediocre. While I have a lot to say in regards to the game as a whole, I want to talk about the developers of this board, Mercenary Technology. These people did the least amount of work when porting this game. I'm generally convinced that instead of optimizing the game for the Vita, they just crammed the console version onto a small card and called it a day. The game stutters and lags to the point of freezing, the audio pops in and out so headphone users beware, and the game renders its backgrounds mid-gameplay. That combined with the stuttering makes the game borderline unplayable at times. The second to last chapter stuttered and lagged so much that the game froze or at times refused to play. Swinging has the camera as close to Peter as possible, so the game has more things to render at once, making the game nauseating to look at. Like, the game plays, looks, and feels as if it's going to crash if I look at it the wrong way, so if you really want to play this game, I'm warning you to avoid this game at all costs. Keep in mind, these are the same developers that ported Black Ops 3 onto the Xbox 360 and the PS3. But as a game, how does it hold up? Beanox's previous work with the franchise were linear story-based action-adventure games, so it was promising to see how they tackle an open-world Spider-Man game. But I'm convinced that they were forced to make it an open-world game considering how linear the game is. From start to finish, you're going to story markers to complete chapters of the game. In other open-world Spider-Man games, there's often downtime to explore New York and to do side quests. And while there is the world to explore and side quests to do, there isn't any downtime or real reason to do them considering how you're forced to go from chapter to chapter. Even the side quests aren't really that fun, so once you complete the campaign, there's no real reason to come back unless you're trophy hunting. The combat is really basic, with it just copying the Arkham formula. The upgrades don't significantly change the combat, and the game opts for theatrics over a deep and fun combo system. The bosses are just there to justify bosses existing, and while they are a tad bit challenging, there are pushovers. And speaking about the bosses, their designs are so bland and boring, and while it was probably meant to fit the film's aesthetic, they should have had more time in the cooker. The game shines in its set pieces and character writing. When the game wants to be epic, it will knock it out of the park and adds a level of scope, but as I've said before, the use of theatrics is meant to distract you from its by-the-numbers moments and overall blandness. And while the story is not groundbreaking and pretty average for a Spider-Man game, I mean the whole virus thing is a common plot point in Spider-Man games and really weird to see now considering the current state of the world, but the characters are written really well to the point where I was laughing at most of the humor and getting attached to these characters. While Sam Riegel isn't my favorite Spider-Man, he had his good moments. Overall, while the game uses theatrics as a crutch for an overall mediocre game, there are genuine moments of greatness that I wish were fleshed out. And while I'll be covering it again once I get to the console games, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. Now as a port, this is the most broken piece of garbage I've ever played. Texture glitches, sound popping that probably broke my headphones, game breaking lag and frame rate drops, and the fact that the game froze more than once made this experience painful to get through. I had to stop every hour or so just to not get sick and to nurse the headache I got from the sound poppins. As a game it gets a 3 out of 5, but as a handheld game and a port, this gets a 1 out of 5. When the phone version of the game runs better than you, then you know you did something wrong. Oh god, there's a 3DS version. Where's the ginger ale?
Hey kids, do you like Spiderman?
Oh yes sir, we love Spider-Man.
Haha, that's great. F you, have Amazing Spider-Man on 3DS.
But we like Amazing Spider-Man on 3DS.
Shit, Incredible Spider-Man on 3DS is fucking boring. I suppose there are some interesting things to talk about, all for the completely wrong reasons, but let's just get the gameplay out of the way first. I can say without a doubt that Spider-Man both deserves and has already gotten games better than this. Spido was my favorite superhero when I was a fucking infant. Spider-Man jogs his way through thrilling gray and brown laboratory corridor stages like he has 12 trees up his ass. Swinging around doesn't feel as good as, say, Spider-Man 2, but it actually has a pretty decent feel for a small-scale spood production, though the programmers don't know how collision works, so you'll find yourself either phasing through objects or standing on invisible objects like you're Jesus. While controlling Sponge Man himself in 3D, the basic controls work fine overall, other than the fact that you can only move in like 4 directions despite the game using the 3DS's circle pad. Combat is boring, lifeless, button mashing, Arkham Asylum light that maps the dodge button to the touchscreen. Why would you do that? It's not like the 3DS is lacking in the buttons department. Why are we fumbling around with the touchscreen? Though at least we have incredibly complicated puzzles spliced in to keep the newborns from playing. The first boss requires use of Spingy's new web dash move. whatever the f it's called. It's clunky as hell, it never seems to hit where you want it to or when you want it to. It worked best when I just spammed the button, and this giant bug mech thing is just a glorified QT. Cool, great game, good, best Spooderman ever. Glad that's over with, let's talk about the best parts, the cutscenes! I find it kind of weird. The opening cutscene is in first person. It just seems kind of odd for a Spider-Man game, especially since you can oddly look around this beautiful environment freely while the cutscene's going on. Gwen scuttles around like f***ing Quasimodo, and Dr. Dick Hips over here looks like he's saying some shit. While walking around Oscorp, there's these evil mutant things that Dr. Scumbubble says they're like dangerous. Lol. And genius Peter knocks on the f***ing glass and says,
"Hey, where'd he go? Come on out, little fella."
Are you blind? Is he still legally blind in this version or something? You don't see this awkwardly floating monster creature? You think it's a fucking cat? I also like how these scientists stand here completely still until the long conversation is over, like, just change the camera angle to avoid that?
Wait, Peter. Take the Oz phone on the table.
The what?
It's the name of the Oscorp phone. It's still a prototype, but at least I'll be able to call you.
What? The Oz phone?
Oz phone.
It's so goofy, I love it. Could have just easily made the line, grab the phone. But they had to add lines to explain what an Oz phone is. I'm dying.
I'm reporter McLadington. I'm here to give an important news update by myself with a bloodthirsty mutant wandering behind me.
Everyone also be glowing like the local power plant exploded.
I'm with Connors now.
I know, Peter. The whole city knows. You broke him out of prison?
It's a mental facility.
Also, I hate Spider-Man in this game. His voice actor and writer makes him sound like such a stupid, smarmy douche for no reason.
Don't shoot me in the back.
I should shoot you right now. Get out of here.
I'm going. Just don't expect a friend request anytime soon.
I'm Spider-Man! I love the social medias! Kids love the social medias! Shut up.
I can't overwrite it. Patients can leave their rooms. This is your fault. You gotta help me.
I have to help you? You tased me, bro.
I hate you. So that's Extraordinary Burgerman 2 on 3DS. It's boring as f***, shovelware trash that's playable, but mostly ungodly boring. Don't bother with it, I'm done, bye.
Developed by the company that created the cult classic White Men Can Jump. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 decides to regress back into a 3D side-scroller instead of an attempt to tackle a 3D Spider-Man game, and I'm glad they did because this game just sucks. The game has touchscreen implementations that don't really work, and ones that you think should be done by tapping the screen aren't. When fighting enemies, you're just spamming the special moves because punching enemies is useless considering how bad the hitbox can be at times. Levels are pretty big and layered like a Metroidvania game, but there's all this space and not much to do with it except to go where you're supposed to. It's basically a linear side-scroller that tries to look like a Metroidvania game. Whenever you begin a new level, you need to swing over there, but instead of actually swinging, you play an endless runner with a time limit. What? Well, once you get halfway through the endless runner, I know how stupid that sounds, you're stopped in order to do a side quest. Basically, instead of these side quests being cool and fighting crime, it's now padding, a forced encounter like it's a fucking Final Fantasy game. Honestly, this whole sequence makes the game look worse than it already does because the buildings at times look unfinished, and this is basically the same thing you did in Spider-Man Unlimited, which is another mobile game that looks better than this game. Keep in mind that both games came out in 2014. This is where I'd say go play that instead, but Spider-Man Unlimited is not in the App Store anymore. Makes sense that the actual Endless Runner is better than the approximation of an Endless Runner. This is basically the entire game, and at that point I lost my will to go on because if the game wasn't going to try, then why should I? One last thing, the leveling system is kind of bad. Instead of going through a skill tree or a skill list, you just beat on enemies to fill up your XP meter, and you can also get XP by collecting XP orbs. Once you fill up the meter, you just choose between 3 different skills, and it goes on from there. To be frank, I never felt like I was getting more powerful with these upgrades, and the meter fills up so slowly that you'll forget there's even an upgrade system at times. You could probably make it a jump scare actually. This game gets a 1 out of 5. Burn it with fire and send it to the Shadow Realm. Developed by Beanox and published by Activision, this was probably the best game out of the handful of games chosen for this video. That being said, it does have its issues, which was something I didn't expect. But then again, I haven't touched the game since it came out 9 years ago, and the last time I saw the game in action was a Wings video. Check it out if you haven't already. But as a port, it's pretty much the same game you got on the 7th generation of consoles with some compromises, but that's expected. The first thing you'll notice is the color palette is way lighter compared to the complex shades and coloring of the console version. Another thing that you'll notice is that some assets lag. This is mostly seen with doors and sometimes enemies, with those assets getting really choppy. But other than that, the game runs great. There's barely overall lag while traversing environments or even during combat, which is great considering the fact that the game lets you throw a bunch of enemies at you with busy environments. There can be lag at times, but it's not game breaking, nor is it really enough to care. Considering how broken the Amazing Spider-Man was on the Vita, this was a godsend. One final issue is that there are times where dialogue tracks overlap, so there will be a time when one character is speaking to be immediately interrupted by another character even before they finish a sentence. This was more seen towards the end of the game, with one of the final bosses having their audio completely drowned by the music, but this pretty much ends my notes on the port as a whole. But let's talk about the game itself. As a direct sequel to Shattered Dimensions, it's weird that 2099 was considered an alternate future, hence the dimension aspect, but in Edge of Time Miguel's from the Amazing Spider-Man future when that was a whole other dimension. While you can say it's not a direct sequel to Shattered Dimensions, it was marketed as such, and the game itself goes out of its way to reference it, either by dialogue or showing pictures of the bosses from the previous game. Instead of Neil Patrick Harris and Dan Gilvezan reprising their roles, Josh Keaton and Christopher Daniel Barnes were brought on as the Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2099. Honestly, the chemistry between Keaton and Barnes make the game, as their interactions are just, well, fun to listen to. The story is also really fun, which makes sense because Peter David was the writer of the story. Peter David is also the creator of Spider-Man 2099 and a similar writer on the main Spider-Man books, so it makes sense as to why the characters and story are written pretty tightly. The gameplay on the other hand is probably the weakest part of the game. The least offensive part is the combat, which is just you mashing the attack button for hours. The only useful upgrade is the ability to stop time, but at times you'll forget that it even exists. The skydive sections of the game are horrendous due to how easy it is for you to die and how hard it is to control Miguel as he battles down. I can't even give one conclusive reason why, because either Miguel's movements are too sensitive that you'll smash into something, or he's too slow that you'll smash into something. What's even worse was when you had to save Mary Jane from a falling elevator and the game wants you to go down at full speed while at the same time dodging obstacles and going through openings. If you decide to slow down so you won't die, you'll get a game over because Mary Jane dies, and if you somehow get to her, you need to button mash the door open, but you need to mash the button so hard that you feel like your 3DS is going to snap in half. The same thing happened near the end of the game and it's just as frustrating. What's next on my list of grievances? Oh yeah, the Black Cat boss. The Black Cat boss was probably the worst boss in the game, and that's because the game expects you to fight her at full strength 3 times in a row without any checkpoints. While yes, you can gain back your health after each fight, and there are like 3 health items, but the amount of damage she does is broken. She can attack you mid-combo, but you can't damage her mid-combo, and she can lock you in her combos, which drains your health ridiculously fast. The only way I managed to beat her was to just listen to a live stream and sweat harder than she was. I quite literally shifted into maximum overdrive. One final issue, but the biggest issue of them all, is the overall structure of the game. The game runs for nearly 7 hours, with 1 hour and 17 minutes dedicated to cutscenes, cinematic and in-game, meaning that there's only 18.8% of story in a story-based game. Now I bet that you're wondering, what are you doing with the other 81.2% of the game? Most chapters have you doing the same thing over and over again, which equates to getting a couple of keys to open a door, fighting enemies to get said keys, crawling around an area with witty commentary, and then something wacky happens to the environment around you in order to prolong the chapter, in which you're following these steps over and over again. While there are slight changes in the formula, it still equates to busy work. You can be playing the game for hours thinking you cleared a chunk of the game to then realize that you only cleared a chapter or 2. At times I just kept playing not to see the next part of the story, but to just beat the game because doing the same thing over and over again with the other issues that came my way only soured my feelings of the game as I went on. Spider-Man Edge of Time as a port gets a 4 out of 5. but as a game it gets a 3 out of 5. Considering its weak structure and basic combat system, the story and character writing carried the game to something memorable. I'll cover the console version of the game at some point, so maybe my feelings will change, who knows. I can't believe that I somehow managed to get through an entire year of handheld Spider-Man games. I know that I'm missing the mobile games, the N-Gage port of Spider-Man 2, and some of the electronic games, but I'll cover those another time. But as of now, I'm closing the book on handheld Spider-Man games and stepping into the world of console games, which will happen sometime next year. I'm kind of burnt on Spider-Man games at the moment. I'd like to thank LeoCrypt, The Game Apologist, Hachi, Daniel T Gaming, Phosphor, Cal the Dragon, The Frozen Cavern, The Lonely Goomba, Sister Zayo, and Ultrafox. Thank you all for coming onto the show to cover either a bad Spider-Man game or a random Marvel game. And I also like to thank Cryogenics for their amazing thumbnails. Without any of you, these videos wouldn't have been as good as they could have been, and I'm really sorry you guys had to play these really bad games. Special thanks to LeoCrypt and Hachi for becoming patrons, and for $1 a month, your name will show up right here. Happy holidays everyone, love you guys, and shamalamoomoo.